I get a lot of emails from folks asking me to help them figure out why their inlays are failing. And I'll try to explain in detail all the different steps and variables that come into play to achieve a successful inlay. And I've mentioned in my previous videos how your machine needs to be accurate and repeatable, and that your bit settings need to be correctly entered. But one variable that is hard for me to put into words so that folks can visualize what I'm trying to get across is explaining that your vector image needs to be edited properly so that it ends up being Vcarve friendly. So I decided to make a short video tutorial on the subject in hopes that I can help some of you out of the rut that you might find yourself in trying to achieve successful inlays. For this demonstration, I'll be using Vcarve Pro version 12. You don't have to have version 12. All we need is the Vcarve toolpath, and I believe that that's included in Vcarve going all the way back to, I think, version 6 or 7. We're not going to be using the new Vcarve Inlay toolpath that comes with version 12, and the reason being is I'm not a fan. And that's for another conversation, but we're just going to be using the good old-fashioned Vcarve toolpath. Now this is the vector that I used to cut out the base and the inlay in the video you just saw previous to this. And this is going to take a little bit of editing for it to fit right. If I were to just use this vector as it is now, I am pretty sure that the inlay would not fit into the pocket. And here's why. If you have a general understanding of how vectors work in relation to the toolpath, if you don't, you should, and maybe this will help you understand it a little better. You can consider a vector an impenetrable boundary that cannot be crossed by your bit. It can cut on the outside of it, it can cut on the inside of it, but it cannot cut through it. Now to show you an example of what I'm talking about, let's just create a circle. It'll be 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And this will signify just a standard 1/4 inch end mill. If we were cutting on the outside of this vector, it would follow the vector, but when it comes to small areas like this, because the diameter of your bit is larger than the distance between these two vectors, it's not going to cut into here. It's going to keep going until it is able to cut in between two vectors, and there's not a whole lot here. Say for instance, if we were to cut into there, it would cut down that far, but it's going to leave this out. And it's going to do it all the way around here because, as you know, standard end mill is going to be square. There's no taper. It's just straight up and down on both sides. Now when we're doing inlays, what we usually use is a tapered end mill. And like the bit that I use for my inlays, the tip is a 10/1000th on the very bottom here on the tip, but it will increase as the angle goes up until you get to the top of the bit, and that's generally 1/4 of an inch depending on the bit that you're using. So the depth that this bit will cut varies because of the angle here as opposed to what it can get in between here. So let me show you another example. Let's get rid of these guys here. Get rid of him. Get rid of that. Now let's create another circle, and this time we'll use a 10/1000th diameter, and this will signify the tip of your tapered bit, at least mine. Now some will vary. You need to know the specs of your bit. Some will be 10/1000ths. I don't think they get any smaller than that. Some will be 15, 20, even 30,000. So you need to know the specs of your bit to understand what I'm talking about. But in this case, like we just talked about, if we were cutting on the outside of this vector, it's going to follow it around the entire distance of the outside of the vector because there's nothing inhibiting it from cutting the entire length. But if we cut in between these two vectors, following along here, it's going to stop. And now this is just the tip. This is 10/1000ths. If we're back here, let me leave this here. Let's create another circle, and let's do 1/8 of an inch. And this would signify further up your bit, your tapered bit, that part of the bit is not going to fit in between here, so your depth will vary. I see posts all the time of guys asking why, that if they're trying to cut 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch deep, why they're not getting that depth in between these narrow vectors here, and that's why. Because let's say, for instance, this is about middle ways of the bit. If you're using a 1/4 inch bit, this is going to be about the halfway mark, okay? So it's not going to fit in there at all. This being the 10,000ths, it will fit in there, but you got to think, you're not going to have any depth here at all, because it is just grazing the top of your wood right now, because the fatter part of the bit will not fit in there. I hope that makes sense. So with that being said, let's get rid of that guy there. So if you were cutting in between these two vectors here, and this again, this signifies the very tip of your bit, that's as far as it's going to go. And if we were to measure that from here to here, we see that that is just shy of the 1/8 of an inch of area that's not going to be cut out of your base or the inlay, whichever this signifies on your image. And that is why your inlay will not fit into your pocket cut when you're trying to fit it in. Well, how do we fix this, Scott? Well, I'm going to show you. Now, what I like to do when I'm editing my vectors is I'll do exactly what I did here. I will create a circle that is the diameter of my tip diameter. In this case, we're going to keep this 10,000th circle, but a lot of time, to give me a margin for error and to get decent depth on the inlays, I may even create a circle that's 20 or 25 thousandths, so I know that I'm getting good depth on all parts of the inlay. But again, for this demonstration, we'll just keep it at the 10,000ths. So what I do is I will move it over until it touches both of the vectors. And this is quick and dirty. I'm going to leave a little bit of overhang here just for ease of cutting. But we're going to cut out of the vector image what we know that the bit is not going to cut. So we'll cut that there, clean that up, clean that up. And now we know, we'll make another circle. That when this bit, the tip of your bit, cuts here and it stops, we're not losing any part of the vector image that won't fit with each other. Because as you know, when you're doing Vcarve inlays, you have to have a base cut and a mirror image inlay cut. So now we fixed that one. Let's go find another one. There's one right there. So we'll move this guy over here. I will move it in until the vectors stop, and again I'm going to let it overlap just a little bit. We'll go to our trim tool, we'll trim that down, clean that up, and then we'll join them together, and we have these two areas fixed. And you have to do that for each narrow angle that comes to an infinite point like this. So I'll just create a bunch of circles. And I'll go to each one. And I will edit each sharp angle tight corner so I know that my bit will fit. And you have to do that for every sharp corner on your image. Now these are okay, these are rounded off because we'll fit that in there. And you can see this point will easily follow along on the inside or outside of the vector. So these are okay. This would be a prime candidate. So we bring that up into there. And again, this is quick and dirty. If I'm being a little bit more elegant with it, I'll pull it back to here. Because again, you have to have a little bit of overlap for the trim tool to work. And that's fixed. And you'll have to do it for every sharp angle, even that guy right there. Let's create a circle here. We see that that's not going to cut properly, so we need to trim that away. Trim away what we know is not going to be cut. Trim away the excess here. And there you go. And you have to do that for each sharp angle. Now, I haven't put a gauge to it, but I think anything less than about 30-degree angle you would need to fix. When you have wider angles like this, like I just demonstrated, you don't have to do it. And you certainly don't have to do it for a square. For a 90-degree angle, you wouldn't have any problems with a 90-degree angle, not at all. So you can leave these sharp corners. It does pose a small problem because it's not going to fit completely, but that is such a minuscule amount. We'll measure from here to here. I mean, that's 2/1000ths. You'll never see that. So you don't have to worry about broad angles. And finally, to show you the difference, I've got an inlay here, inlay vector, and this will show this is the edited vector we just did. This is the non-edited vector, and you can see the parts of the vector image that would not be cut as compared to the ones that we just edited. So if you can imagine trying to fit that into that, that's why your inlays aren't fitting into your pocket correctly. And this is the biggest thing that really affects your inlays. I've talked about how the calibration of your machine is important. It is. The specs of your bit being entered correctly into Vcarve. It is. But this is 50% of the battle here, guys. I mean, you have got to edit your images properly to make sure that they're Vcarve friendly and your inlays fit properly. And finally, it's worth mentioning, you don't have to edit each vector independently. You can just edit one vector and then copy it for your inlay. And I'll show you, like, we'll go and we'll delete this. So if this was our edited vector, let's create a new layer and we'll call it inlay. And we just copy this vector to the inlay vector. We can turn that off. And now all you have to do is flip that horizontally. And of course, you have to draw a boundary around it to encapsulate whatever your inlay vector is going to be. And you can create your tool path. And now you have two edited vectors that will fit identical in each other because, like I said, you've edited all these sharp corners. So there you have it. If you've been having problems with your inlays fitting into your pockets, this may be the solution to your problem. So be on the lookout for a video on this particular inlay. This is one of the first cuts I made on a cutting board I just created. So be on the lookout for that video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See you soon.